You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristadoulou.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to more of the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and today, on this October 11th, 2022, I'm coming at you guys with my Week 6 NFL Power Rankings after Week 5 wrapped up in pretty exciting fashion last night between the Raiders and the Chiefs in a Monday Night Football clash that I think wound up being a lot closer than everyone expected it to be. Very controversial roughing the passer call and some penalties late in the game. A controversial no catch that was called on the Raiders' behalf, or on the Chiefs' behalf, but overall, a fantastic ending to what has been a very exciting season so far. We're 5 weeks through, so a little bit over the first quarter of the way in, and all I've got to say is this season has not disappointed so far, and I cannot wait to rank all these teams with you guys. So make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and comment down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And everything in between about where I have all 32 teams ranked from worst to first. And we'll start right now with the very bottom of the list, 32 through 29 here, and we'll jump right into it. I have the Panthers sitting at the very bottom of the league at 32, Texans at 31, the Bears at 30, and then the Steelers at 29. The Panthers got absolutely waxed by the 49ers this week, 37-15, and it just wasn't really ever too close. And obviously, Matt Rule now being fired, no longer with the team, it kind of leaves the Panthers in a whole restart, rebuild type of mode, even though they've been kind of doing that for the last few years, trying to figure themselves out. Oddly enough, defense has been the one bright spot of a team that has been so bad, and it's a little bit disappointing to see that this team kind of has to kick into a reboot, because I really like the defense over there in Carolina, despite the fact that they just let up 37 points. When your offense isn't doing anything for you, I mean, what are you supposed to do? But tough to see the Panthers where they are right now. Let's see where they go going into Week 6 and forward, but just in a really rough shape right now. The Texans moving up one spot. They get an upset victory over the Jacksonville Jaguars, and while I wanted to move them up higher, it's just I haven't really seen enough from them to really warrant them to be moving up that much, and I know that the Jaguars were ranked highly by a lot of people. Even myself, they were fairly high on my power rankings just last week, but the Jaguars are starting to taper off a little bit, and while I thought it was maybe the rain and their loss against the Eagles, they come in and they completely just let down during this game against the Texans this week, and I think it's more of an indictment on the Jaguars than it is on what the Texans are as a unit, being 1-3-1 now, so they're still sitting at the bottom. You could argue they probably belong a little bit higher, but I still like them at 31. The Bears at 30, tough loss to a division rival against the Minnesota Vikings, 29-22, but a really close game nonetheless. I feel like division games always end up being a lot closer than people expect them to be, because the two teams just know each other so well, and they're really action-packed, really fun to watch. The Bears, they sit at number 30. They don't move up. They don't move down. Again, tight loss. I don't want to knock them for something like that, so we'll keep them at 30. Steelers at 29, dropping another spot after getting completely blown out by the Buffalo Bills, and I also thought about maybe moving them a little bit lower, but when I looked at the three teams behind them, I figured those other teams would probably fare just as poorly, if not worse, than the Steelers did, so we have the Steelers now sitting at 29. Moving into the next group of four, we are looking at the Washington Commanders, moving up a spot despite their loss to the Tennessee Titans, because they were fairly competitive to the very end, and ultimately just a few poor passes and a close opportunity to stealing a victory over a Tennessee Titans team that seems to be finding itself, but I do want to give them some credit, so I do have them moving up a spot to 28. Moving up in a loss, can't really complain. The Lions dropping a spot after getting completely blown out by the Patriots. And while this is another one that I feel maybe you could drop them down further, more so for me, it's about the fact that this is a Lions team that has been looking really good so far. They were missing some pieces in this game and just some really questionable play calling. I don't know if this game is speaking for what Dan Campbell is as a coach, but just all the fourth down attempts and failing them all. I believe they went 0-6 on fourth down. This was a head-scratching week because they've looked so competitive. I know the defense has not been great. The defense has been awful, and the offense has been outstanding. We'll see if this was a matter of just a poor coaching matchup, and the best thing that could happen to this team is that they learn something from this, Dan Campbell especially going forward, and they rebound going into next week. So I have them at 27 for right now, but we'll see where they go. The Broncos at 26, falling all the way down the board 10 spots here after losing their game 12-9 to the Indianapolis Colts in overtime with an opportunity to steal the game and win. the offense makes no sense to me right now. The defense over there is so good. Pat Surtain has just turned into an absolute monster of a cornerback. They have a solid pass rush. They have a solid linebacking corps. They have a great secondary, everything, even with the injuries that they're dealing with. I don't know what's going on over there in Denver, but they need to figure it out. And then the Seahawks at 25, they don't move up, they don't move down. Tight loss, but ultimately, I just feel like with everything else that was going on around them, I like them at 25. They didn't, again, not a bad loss, tight loss at worst. Lose by 7 to the Saints and a tight one there. They're competitive the whole way through. Definitely one of the better of the bottom teams in the league, I would say. Moving into the next 4, we're looking at the Raiders at 24, the Jets at 23, Colts at 22, and the Falcons at 21. Raiders falling one spot here in a very competitive loss last night to the Chiefs during Monday Night Football, 30-29. Did not really want to knock them for that. Again, it's a division rival matchup, so those games tend to be closer anyways. The teams know each other so well. A lot more emotion going on in those games, but solid, valiant effort by the Raiders. They're now 1-4. They are one of the more talented bottom teams. They have such a good roster, but injuries just cannot seem to let them go. Losing Darren Waller, I would say, hurt them in that game especially, but right now, I'm going to have to leave them at 24. Jets moving up 4 spots here. Big victory for them, completely blowing out the division rival. And while Skylar Thompson was the guy that was throwing the football on the other side of the field, the Dolphins kept it close towards the very end of the game. It was that fourth quarter that things really blew up, and we're looking at a 40-17 final score between the Jets and Dolphins. But hats off to the Jets, man. Zach Wilson comes back. Offense is really starting to finding itself. I'm really excited to see how they fare. The Colts at number 22, they move up a couple of spots. I didn't really want to move them up too much here despite their Thursday night victory. Offense has got to figure it out. The offensive line is in shambles right now. Running back situation, not looking good. They lost Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor being out. They've got to figure it out over there in Indy. And the Falcons at 21, valiant effort by them in a loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 21-15. They're mounting that comeback in the fourth quarter. Obviously, the sack that everyone was confused as to why it was the roughing the passer penalty. And while I did not disagree with the roughing the passer penalty last night on Monday Night Football, and the same for the one that happened in that Falcons and Buccaneers game, by rule, they were technically good calls. But do I agree with that rule? Not necessarily. But I got the Falcons at 21. Moving into the next 4, we're looking at the Cardinals at 20, the Saints at 19, the Browns at 18, and then the Jaguars at 17. Now, the Cardinals, tight loss, 20-17 to the Philadelphia Eagles. Some very poor, just situational awareness by the coaching staff. Kyler Murray was saying that he was being told in his ear to clock the ball, and apparently the coaching staff didn't realize they did not pick up the first down when he slid, and it was 3rd and 1. They thought it was 1st and 10, and what a weird scenario that whole thing was. They lose the game ultimately with a wide right kick on the field goal attempt. I keep them at 20. They don't move up. They don't move down. Saints at 19, move up a couple of spots, as I mentioned with the Seahawks game. Really tight contest there. I picked them to win that game. A little bit surprised they still won. I kind of felt like there was a slight chance that maybe the Seahawks steal this game, even though I had the Saints winning, but they got the job done. Big victory, a much-needed one, despite not having your quarterback and missing a handful of wide receivers. Browns, they stay at 18. They don't move up. They don't move down. A tight loss, 30-28. And the Chargers almost literally let them right back into the game. And we'll talk about Brandon Staley in a second, but close one. The Browns have been in a lot of games that they probably shouldn't have been, and I can only imagine how good this team is going to be once Deshaun Watson comes back, so long as he can still reach the level of play he had prior to all the issues that he's been dealing with. But we'll see. The Browns are awfully competitive despite having Jacoby Brissett at their quarterback, and that ground game is unbelievable. The Jaguars at 17, they dropped 3 spots here. A really bad loss to the Houston Texans. I'm really starting to get worried about this team. I really thought that, a lot of their issues last week was just, the bad rain, the ball slipping out of players' hands and things like that. There was the one specifically with Trevor Lawrence where it literally just flew out of his hand as he was running. But it's starting to seem like maybe some of the deficiencies in the roster are starting to rear their ugly head. We'll have to see. It was a division game. The Houston Texans tend to always surprise a team or two in that AFC South, but right now, not looking good for the Jags. Moving into our next group of 4, we got the Patriots at 16, the Dolphins at 15, who fall a massive 10 spots, the Titans at 14, and then the Rams falling 5 spots at 13. Patriots, big victory, shutout win, a statement victory. I cannot believe I talked myself out of a Patriots victory. When I initially looked at the matchups for last week, my first thought when I saw Patriots-Lions was Belichick outcoaches the Lions, plain and simple. And then somehow I managed to, by looking at numbers and some film and things like that, I somehow managed to talk myself into the possibility that the Lions were actually going to win that game in Gillette. In hindsight, it makes no sense to me to be picking the Lions, but I did. Stupid pick on my part. Still went 10-6, but still a stupid pick nonetheless. Hats off to the Patriots. They looked fantastic on defense. I'm excited to see where this Patriots team continues to go forward with Bailey Zappi, because it's some interesting stuff going on right now. Dolphins at number 15, they dropped 10 spots here, and I know that, they're dealing with injuries at quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater didn't have concussion symptoms, but he was held out of the game and all of that, yada, yada, yada. I'm worried about the team right now. It does not sound like Tua's coming back anytime soon, and if Teddy Bridgewater, I know he didn't necessarily need to miss time in this game, and he ended up missing the whole thing. Hopefully he comes back next week, but not the same team without Tua right now, and they're definitely in a fall from grace, and it's a really unfortunate situation. The Titans at 14, they move up 3 spots here in a tight contest over the Commanders, and I've got to say this team really feels like it's starting to find itself in its running game. This team in general, and this game specifically against the Commanders, it lived and died on the shoulders of Derrick Henry and the running back room there. The offensive line's really starting to open up those lanes, and if the Titans can continue to lead through with Derrick Henry, as they have been fairly successful doing with him as their lead back, I feel good about this team. Playoff team, as long as he's playing well and the offensive line's playing well. Tannehill just needs to keep the turnovers to a minimum, be the, solid quarterback that he's been throughout his career in Tennessee, and this is a team that I think can find itself as, at worst, the 5, 6, 7 seed, but a potential winner of the AFC South. The Rams at 13, falling 5 spots here in a loss to the Cowboys that I honestly wasn't really too surprised about. I picked the Cowboys to win that game. Offensive line issues are just really rearing their ugly head. I know they're missing Van Jefferson right now, and clearly Allen Robinson is not quite as dynamic of a receiver as, say, having Odell Beckham in there, and it's clearly not the same offense that it was last year. I think the offensive line is really the biggest issue, more so than anything else, because Stafford's had success with big body receivers that go up and 50-50 catch all the time, as is the type of wide receiver Allen Robinson is, but they've got a lot of issues in the O-line. The defense is still pretty good. It's just the offensive line, man. They've got to figure it out over there in LA, because right now they're starting to look less like a contender and more like a pretender. Next 4 teams, we are looking at the Bengals at number 12, Packers at 11, the Chargers at 10, and the 49ers at 9, moving up 4 spots here. So the Bengals, they drop a couple spots in a tight loss to their division rival Baltimore Ravens. Listen, this Bengals team is definitely struggling here and there, but they weren't necessarily super hot going through like the middle portion of last year. It was that back half of the season where they really started to pick up. I think they're still trying to find themselves a little bit. I consider them one of the better 2 and 3 teams in the league right now. I'm a little bit worried about the way this offensive line looks, considering how much money they've put into it, but the defense still looks really good. I still believe in Joe Burrow and the skill players they have there. If this offensive line can just figure it out, I believe in this team. And also, let's try to scheme some things where, Joe Burrow's not left saying at the end of the game, if the deep ball's not there, we can't take the deep shots. Well, we got to scheme some guys open there, Zach Taylor, because that was kind of a interesting game to watch where you're only seeing 1 20-plus yard attempt from Joe Burrow, considering how many deep balls and deep plays that this team has made the last, year and some change since Joe Burrow came back from his injury. Packers falling 6 spots here at number 11. I've got to say this. I'm very surprised considering how good the coaching is. The defense is pretty solid over there. The receiving core is ultimately a little bit of an issue. They're clearly off schedule with Aaron Rodgers, and they've got to figure that out. But I will say that I still believe in this team to an extent. I'm starting to get a little bit worried about them. I definitely have less belief in them than I did maybe a couple of weeks ago, but it's still Aaron Rodgers. It's still the Packers. They have such a solid history since Matt LaFleur's gotten there. I believe they'll turn it around. I think it's just going to take time for this young receiver group to really, take shape and find its rhythm with Rodgers. But man, there are just some plays and some drives where Aaron Rodgers comes off the field and is just like, why did I come back to play? Interesting stuff going on in Green Bay, but ultimately tough loss against the Giants in London. We'll see where the Packers go going forward. Chargers at number 10, they move up a spot here. And I've got to say, it's a very tight game, a game that I didn't expect the Browns to really be able to hang with, but their run defense struggling, which was kind of a theme last year. I know that they're dealing with injuries on the defensive side of the ball, but they just seemed like they could not stop Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So hopefully they can figure something out there. But ultimately, it was a tight victory, a game that you want to see a team that you expect to see in the playoffs win in those type of scenarios where maybe they're letting a lesser team per se hang in there. Brandon Staley needs to figure out some of his play calling and decision making, because I know since he's gotten in the league, he's kind of known for some off the wall decision making, and he's a risk taker and what have you. You're in the lead, and at this point, it's 30-28. Time is running out in the game. Punt the football. Don't go for it when you're. What was it like? I think they were right outside the 50-yard line. Of their own territory. I don't remember exactly the yard line specifically, but you essentially put the Browns right into field goal range. And thank goodness the Browns lost a yard and weren't able to make that field goal, because you almost handed the game away. So let's just figure that out. You move up one spot in the power rankings this week, but some risky business going on over there, and I don't like it. 49ers moving up 4 spots here to number 9, so they're cracking the top 10 here now. I really love the defense there, despite all the injuries they're dealing with. Jeff Wilson looks phenomenal as the running back over there in San Francisco right now. Obviously, the rest of the skill talent is what it is, and Jimmy Garoppolo is pretty much Jimmy Garoppolo right now. They looked really good against the Panthers team that's in a really bad spot. I don't necessarily know if I think they're a top 5 team. I see some people putting them all the way up there. Oh, the defense is great and what have you. Still not sold on the offense, and it is Jimmy Garoppolo. We kind of know what he is, and it's keeping me from putting them up any higher, but top 10 team with how good that defense is and how good those skill players are over there in San Fran. O-line still doing well despite Trent Williams being out. I like the 49ers right now. They're trending in the right direction. Next group of 4, we got the Vikings at 8, the Bucks at 7, the Giants at 6, and then the Cowboys at 5. So the Vikings moving up a spot here. Tight win over a division rival. You probably let the Bears hang in there a little bit too much, but ultimately you get the win. As I mentioned earlier with a couple other teams, when you see them in a situation like this where they're letting a team that probably shouldn't be hang around, you want to see them ultimately get the win despite those circumstances, and the Vikings did just that. The Buccaneers, they don't move up, they don't move down. Again, another team where you have a team that's hanging around with you. They jumped out to a really early lead, and then offense just kind of stalled out in the second half. They weren't putting up the points anymore. This offense in Tampa Bay has been so weird, because on paper, great group. I know the offensive line is dealing with some issues, but skill position-wise, quarterback-wise, you'd expect the sky is basically the limit for this team, and they just can't quite get it going here. Or if they do, sometimes they stall out. And they've only had a couple of really good games, so they put up a decent amount of point in this past week and the week prior. I like Tampa Bay. I think they're going to be a playoff team. Tom Brady's leading the way, and I think as long as Tom Brady's quarterback, they're a contender. But definitely not as good as I thought this offense was going to be coming into this season. The Giants, one of the biggest movers in the positive direction here, moving up 9 spots. I'm finally giving them the respect they deserve. They knocked off the Packers in London. Daniel Jones is actually playing some pretty good football despite a bum ankle right now. Saquon Barkley is, again, having his career resurgence, and things are looking really good in New York. I've got to say, I was holding them back a little bit, but this was the statement victory I really needed to see from them, and I'm a believer now. At number 6 in my top 32 here, and hats off to the Giants, man. I did not expect them to be 4-1 right now. I believe I had them as the worst team in the NFC East going into the season. So hats off to them for the surprises that they've been. I really like the way this team is playing right now. And if they continue on with what they're doing, Brian Daboll, my goodness, have you turned the ship around? Because this is not what I expected to see from the Giants in his first season at all. And I'm very surprised with everything we're getting here. And I'm sure some of you New York fans are as well. Cowboys at number 5, they move up 7 spots as well, giving them the credit where credit is due. They also pull off a statement victory against a Rams team that's been showing some cracks, and I would say that they completely shattered the glass here on this one with the Rams. The Cowboys defense is just so good. The pass rush is so disruptive, and you have Cooper Rush, who he knows the system so well. He's been in Dallas for so long now. It's only benefited him. And I think it's kind of proving a point in the NFL where you have teams that kind of rotate through backup quarterbacks and, the guys kind of just cycle around the league. It almost feels like it's not a bad idea to get a guy in your system young and grow him behind your starting quarterback. Have him be in that system for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, despite what his play might have been in some instances where in Cooper Rush, he's 5-0 as a starter, but in all other cases where that's probably not going to happen, it's good to have a guy who knows your system, who's been there for a long time, because it's really benefited Cooper Rush. He's kept the turnovers at a minimum. He's been very good and played solid complementary football with the talent and pieces around him. And at this point, they're 4-0 since their first loss. And then the defense, again, is just carrying this unit. I cannot believe the Cowboys are where they are right now. Again, another team really surprising, but I need to give the credit where it's due. Big victory this week. They got the job done. Hats off to them. And then for the top 4, we're looking at the Ravens at number 4, the Chiefs at number 3, and then the Bills and Eagles sitting up at the very top. Bills at 2, Eagles at 1. So the Ravens moving up a couple of spots here. Big victory, Sunday Night Football. You're going up against a division rival that blew you out twice last year, and this year, all that does not matter. I was feeling the Bengals going into that one, and I picked them to win that game, but ultimately, the Ravens, they've dropped some games at home, and they needed to get this victory here more because for like the psyche than anything else. You can't be dropping games at home the way they have been and be successful throughout the season. And they finally have a bounce back game where they have Justin Tucker, the GOAT of kickers at this point. And, you can trust in him no matter what. Offense gets in a position late in the game. They steal the victory. Lamar Jackson is what Lamar Jackson is. He is a playmaker. He has a throw here and there that maybe you're like, what the heck? And, he has an interception here or there, but I don't want to say that Joe Burrow played too much better than he did. And Lamar Jackson, man, is just unbelievable. And that offense, it's so unique and so fun to watch. I love Baltimore, man. It's such a fun team to watch. The Chiefs, they stay at the number 3 spot. They do not move. A tight game. You want to see them win those tight games. I would say that I was a little bit surprised seeing the Chiefs offense kind of struggle those first few drives, but once they got that rhythm rolling, Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes is an absolute problem. 4 touchdowns between the two of those guys. And I mean, the Chiefs are the Chiefs, man. With Patrick Mahomes under center, you can never count them out. No matter how deep the hole is that they find themselves in, they were able to dig themselves out of it, notch up a victory. And just hats off to KC, man. An excellent game by them. Bills completely walked the Steelers all the way home. The Bills, man, they're doing their thing. This is the 3rd time this year I think they've dropped 30-some-odd points and blown out a team. I mean, the Bills, if they're not one of your Super Bowl favorites, I don't know what you're doing. But you can maybe argue they're the number 1 team. But for me, I like just seeing the Eagles at number 1 complete games in a way that the Bills they've lost one, and it was a tight game that they probably should have won. And I like seeing what the Eagles do because they're in tighter situations and coming out with the victory, and they just get it done in all kinds of different ways. Whereas like the Bills are basically just like that team that is going to throw the football down your throat. The Eagles can run the football down your throat, but they can also pass the football down your throat. I feel like there's a little more variance to the Eagles offense than the Bills, and I like that about them. I will say that I'm seeing a little too much rushing going on from Jalen Hurts the last couple of weeks, but it's still getting the job done. I like the evolution of Jalen Hurts passing this season. I think he's evolved into an excellent passer at this point, and I want to see him continue to double down on that and continue to shut people up. That the whole running back at quarterback narrative seems to follow him around, not as much as Lamar Jackson, but it is something that I see pop up every now and again when I'm looking around the internet. I like the Eagles at number 1. Defense is great. Pass rush over there. Secondary solid. Offense is obviously phenomenal, and any one of their running backs could be a legit dude on other teams with how well they play. I like the Eagles at 1, so edging out the Bills by a hair. Well, those are my power rankings for all 32 teams. I appreciate you guys for hanging out and sticking around to the very end. If you did, make sure, again, you hit that like and subscribe button. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Have a good one.